Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
I'm so honored that you'd take a few minutes of your time to join me, Randall, on this edition of Around with Randall. I want to broaden our scope in this weekly conversation that I have. I look at this as my 21st century classroom. I want to talk about hope, about what I see sometimes that pulls from that, why hope is important, and then the tactical pieces. Why is it connected to philanthropy so critically? And how do we develop it? How do we find it? How do we remember it? I want to start with why I think I, at least here, perceive that there is maybe less hope than there used to be. So on a very anecdotal scale, I've had a number of clients whose philanthropy numbers maybe aren't what they want. One is working through a campaign that for various non-foundation related issues is a little bit of a struggle. Another that has an organization who wants them to fundraise for things that may not be feasible, but it's a hard conversation. I've got some personal friends in the industry, professional colleagues who are trying to figure out where they're at, where they're going. I think there's also wider reasons for a reduction in hope. We have some world instability that is very prominent right now. We have the effects coming out of the pandemic, which while medically we probably aren't dealing with in terms of the direct nature of COVID, at least as much as we used to, the effects of it are still lingering. We certainly have a changing economic climate where there has been inflation. And to be candid, while there may be some, and this is not a political commentary, there are some who say, hey, we're over it. You look at the base necessities of a lot of people, they're really struggling. Grocery store, gas, just basic clothes, other things of that nature. That doesn't even take into the issues involving housing. When we talk about the wider lens of the world, I think we all recognize that we have a climate conversation that needs to occur. What does that look like? Where are we headed with that? Here, at least in the United States, we seem, and this is going to be my least favorite 2 months of every 4 years, although I love American democracy and I love elections. The advertising I could do without. The next 2 months are going to be hard because it's a lot of yelling and screaming. We also have a lot of things in our personal lives. For me, I can tell you that, last year losing dad, that was not the moment that we all wanted, and certainly are working through that. And then if I think more longitudinally and absolutely less important to anything I've already talked about, for me, I'm tired of Nebraska football losing. Now, by the time this gets played, maybe we've got a little run going and we all feel better, but man, it's been a wearing 20 years. When you invest your emotional soul into something and see it be disappointing. You have your things in life as well that are troublesome, that are challenging, that are things you have to work through and figure out. What this all brings into context is what I call my 80-60-20, or my 20-60-20 rule. That most of the time, and maybe even 10-80-10, that the things at the extremes, the people, the groups, the 10% at when you have an issue, they believe one and the other 10% maybe believe, or 20% believe the absolute opposite. They're the loudest. And that most of us live in the 60, 70, 80% in the middle. We're just trying to get along. Sometimes it's hard because we think that the loudest are the largest, and they're not. They're just loud. But we tend to find either hope or non-hope or despair more in that loudness at the ends of the paradigm. And so my first moment of counsel, for whatever it's worth, is that most of us are in the middle. You can take it comfort. Most of us sit in the middle. And we're just trying to figure out how to work on the things that are most important to us, the day-to-day things that are a priority in our life. Why is hope so important? Well, hope in the professional sense, in the personal sense, in the more maybe national or global sense, is about psychology and emotional connection. That when hope lives with you, with a family, with a small group, with an organization, with a community, with a nation, whatever it might be, several things come out of it. Number one is motivation and drive. When you have hope, you're more likely to engage the world in trying to get something done. Number two is there's a sense of resiliency and coping that comes when you have hope. You're more willing to maybe embrace the what I term the water off a duck's back. That while some things may not be able to be washed away, you're willing to fight through them because it's worth it. There's hope on the other side of that. Number three is emotional well-being. We know from the medical studies, particularly over the last 15 or 20 years, that when people are more grateful, more hopeful, they have incredible connections to not only mental and emotional well-being, but number four is also physical health, well-being. Things like blood pressure and the thought process of we talk emotional health, resiliency, being able to overcome. Actually, there are studies now that indicate that when we have hope and gratitude and a positive way of looking at life, we fight off depression and negativity better. On the health side, so this is again 3 and 4, emotional and physical health and well-being. We know that in terms of epigenetics, that our genes fire and trigger to fight disease more often when we have more hope, more positive thought process. So 3 and 4, your emotional and physical well-being is better. Number 5 is hope brings social connection, which is human beings we strive for, we need, we seek. When you have a group of people that all hope together, it becomes contagious and almost like collective action. These 5 things are critical for us to understand because they connect us to this idea of what we're trying to accomplish, which we're going to get to in a moment, which is making the world a better place. There are times in our history that if we look back, we can see both hope and non-hope or despair. The first thing I want to talk about is that while things look a little bit in upheaval right now, there have been times in our history where it's been significantly worse. I mean, we're not even comparable to where we were in places like the late 19 teens and the 1940s when we had world wars and just the thought process of tens of millions of people dying in a fight for a lot of different things. Most people would say something about freedom and democracy and letting people live the way they want. Needless to say, it was about people dying for things they believed. You could throw in the United States, the Civil War, people were dying so fast, it paled. I mean, the other wars that we've had pale in comparison to the number of deaths in the Civil War. We had a time in our country where we embraced slavery, which any rational person would say is an incredible stain on the historic nature of America. But it was ours. We can't run from it. We have to embrace it and say, yeah, and we did it, and we're not going to let it happen again. I would say that the times involving the Depression from an economic standpoint, worldwide, the last part of 1929 into the 1930s and really up until through World War II, in terms of economic strife at the local level, those were times when people, I mean, literally homelessness, 10-15% of the population had no home. I mean, we certainly have challenges today. We don't have anything like that, where we had people who were literally having to sell their cars just to make sure their family could eat. The Depression was just over 100 years ago, and I think most of us have not lived through those kind of economic times. And we have other times like them. In the 1870s, there was a depression. In the 1830s, there was a depression. The 1930s depression was epic proportion. Politically, I would tell you that I'm a student of history, so I like reading this stuff. While the presidential election and the congressional and senatorial elections that are occurring right now, even maybe local elections, are a little tough to take, to be honest with you, and no matter which side of the political aisle you're on. You can go back to 1824 and compare it to that in that presidential election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, and you would find that what we're doing today is like nothing. still not very fun. But in 1824, they were literally calling one of their presidential candidates' wives a whore in writing, which at the time is all they had. They didn't have radio or television. I mean, it was abhorrent. There have been worse times, but in those times, we've also found heroic leadership bringing us hope. During the Depression, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt doing his fireside chats. You read the accounts of people's psychological connection to the president at the time, who is our longest serving president. You may disagree with some of his economic policies, his political policy, whatever. He brought hope in those fireside chats to the radio, telling the American people, we're going to get through this. And thus, in 1945, when he passes, it is an enormous emotional outlet of a loss of a leader that had guided them. One of my all-time favorites in terms of leadership and hope is Nelson Mandela, imprisoned on Robben Island in South Africa for 27, 28 years. He comes out. Does he preach retribution? No, he preaches hope that we as a country can pull together to become a new identity of what the world might be. He didn't take his hatred for others, which I think many people might say he really was able to push away, but to create hope, not just for his people and African people, Black, but for all people in South Africa to bring it into the 21st century. Winston Churchill with his words, and I've done a couple of podcasts on Winston Churchill, probably my all-time favorite leader because of his ability with words to move mountains in terms of hope. At a time when the world looked like it was turning on England in terms of what was going on in their potential invasion. They'd been thrown out of Europe. They have the Battle of Britain in 1940. He preaches hope. There's also futuristic hope. What John F. Kennedy talked about in 1961, first at Congress in the State of the Union, and then at a speech at Rice University in Houston, Texas, talking about a goal of sending a man to the moon and bringing him back safely before the end of the decade, was about hope. Hope brings communities opportunities to dream, to think about what might be. And this is why this is connected to what we do in philanthropy. Philanthropy, let's start with the concept, doesn't mean money. It means love of mankind, love of humankind. And so number one is, how is hope connected to what we do in philanthropy? Because it's our foundation. It's about hope bringing the thought that a difference can be made when we improve the lives of others and what I would call societal issues or problems. A lot of times, hope is what gets a community to pull together to do something for others. Number two is that hope inspires action. Much of the time, hope in and of itself, while I think beneficial health-wise, doesn't actually move the needle. It's action that moves the needle. And this is action that is positive for both the donor, one of those rare times in life where there's two winners, the donor who feels like they're helping, making a difference, and the recipient who's needing the help. How is that not hopeful? That is the core of who we are. The third way it's connected is that hope sustains us during challenging times. Think about, in a very basic way, we had this happen here in Omaha this year, that a storm came through, and a tornado, and most of the time when we see tornadoes are out in the cornfields. This one hit the western suburbs, took our city down for quite a while. People losing homes, people losing everything. Hope. Both people who needed the hope, who's lost everything, but people who saw the devastation and willing to help, creating hope. The organization I think of that does this the best is the Red Cross. They show up to foster, to engender hope. The fifth is that hope can, when it becomes systematized, create change. Philanthropy and philanthropists are there to fund innovative solutions that might be too risky or not bring the kind of return a commercial investor, meaning, for-profit business, they don't want to do that. It doesn't bring the return or it's too risky, or that governmental bodies are too slow. At the end of the podcast, I often say that philanthropy is the gap between governmental entity and commercial or free enterprise. Because if free enterprise doesn't want to do certain things, it doesn't bring us any money. The government moves too slow. That's where philanthropy sits at its best. Sometimes it has to partner with both to bridge that gap. That's really what we're talking about, systemic change. Number 5 is philanthropy brings a sense of empowerment in our communities, a sense that we're building capacity to accomplish more, that we foster this hope, this philanthropy to actually have more control of our future, not just individually, but collectively. This is what moves many people to come together in one vision. And finally, within that vision, number 6 is the idea of solidarity, that we can do better, we should do better, but also that this is a communal experience and a shared humanity. I talked about this many podcasts ago about the idea of a shared experience being a powerful ally. I drew it to the comparison of athletics, that when you go to an athletic event, the left and the right, the tall and the short, the poor and the rich, the white, the black, the Catholic, the Jewish, the Muslim, whatever differences in your community exist, sometimes, most of the time actually, are dismantled and pushed aside for the communal. We're interested, in my world, Nebraska athletics, we're pulling together as one. Whether it's the connection to really the definition, the idea of the foundation of philanthropy, or the idea of inspiring hope through action, or creating the idea of challenging times and creating hope, or it becomes part of change in our community from a systematic perspective, it empowers us in terms of our communities, or it demonstrates solidarity and a kind of a shared humanity. These are all the basics of philanthropy. It's what we do every day. And so the last part of this is, well, what can you do to create hope, to recognize hope? So you can look at this as an individual, or you can look at this as a leader, doing it for others, doing it for yourself. And that's an or and an and. It's not mutually exclusive. You should be thinking about both if you can. So the first is recognizing hope. It's about looking at and finding positive future opportunities, outcomes. I always talk about with my son and his friends, anybody else that'll listen, that life isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you deal with it. And how you deal with it, you have a choice. Do you look at everything negatively, or do you try to find, and I hate the term, but it connects to what we're talking about, making lemons out of lemonade, or making lemonade out of lemons, excuse me. Are you going to find options, opportunities, even when things aren't the perfect manner? How do we recognize a sense of grace that we all enjoy, even those who are maybe at the lowest end of our socioeconomic status, having trouble with drugs? What can we do to foster a sense of hope? And the first part is recognition, and that is in what's in the future to come, positive or negative. The second is creating goals, being goal directive. If you set goals, which we've done a number of podcasts on, what that's doing is creating hope for yourself because you're thinking about, how do I improve? That's positive. Number 3 is recognizing moments where you have dealt with and been gone through and shown resiliency during adversity. My son had a soccer game here recently, and they've been very successful. We have not really even been challenged in terms of a game in a year and a half. And they weren't ready to play, and they met a team that was much better. I mean, skill-wise, and got down quick. And and you could tell there was shock. And I kept saying, "Hey, look, let's play against ourselves. Let's keep doing what we're doing." And what came out of it was a tie. We came back and scored with about a minute and a half left, tie the game 4-4. And I sent an email to the parents later that day and said, I've never been more proud of this group of kids in a tie versus any win. because they dealt with adversity. They created, in many ways, small goals. Get better every time I'm out there. Do small things to get better. Be a team. Choose to pull together. That Think about your office when there's challenges in philanthropy. Do you pull together to get through the adversity? Do you individually, when there's challenges, think about how to observe yourself and others and what you've gone through to realize you've accomplished things before? Resiliency is critical to overcoming lack of hope and finding it again. The last in the recognizing hope is an idea of emotional flexibility. Can you pay attention to the emotions that just don't drown you out, that are negative? And really what I'm talking about is fear, to see a better chance for the future. So recognizing hope's about that future orientation, about being goal directed, about resiliency, and about creating a vision of being more positive than negative. But you can also create hope for yourself, for the people that you serve in your mission as a nonprofit leader, board member, employee, whomever you are. Hope is also about, as an organization, are you, and we'll get into this in a second, thinking big enough? Creating hope is possible if you do it in certain steps. The first is that you set achievable goals. For an individual, that's maybe very small, but for an organization, that could be large. What is achievable is dependent on the amount of hope and vision and strategy you and your organization have. Number two is fostering a positive environment. It's interesting. I've got a client who has brought in some new employees, and there's one who's just negative. It's always a problem. There's always issues. And what we've begun to talk about is the organization, even though she has skill sets, even though she can deliver certain things, is the organization better if they don't have that negativity? Because fostering a positive environment will create more hope for everybody else in the office. It's an interesting conversation. I'm not saying sacrifice, but where does the greater good come from not being around people who can't find a positive, hopeful future? Number three is engaging in inspirational activities. Yes, we have to do the mundane and the day-to-day, but what other things can we do that are inspirational? To see others possibly overcoming their challenges, recognizing those in the office that have gone through their particular goal, self-celebrating your own goals. All of those things are inspirational and bring value to the overall office and to the overall effort that you might be going through. You've heard me talk about this. I will not spend a lot of time. In fact, I have done a number of podcasts on the idea of embracing and practicing mindfulness or gratitude. What are we actively grateful for every day? Number five, how do we celebrate those that help support where we're trying to go and really create a sense of an environment of encouragement for accomplishment? The last one is, if maybe all the first five or maybe a little bit more of a challenge, think back on the things in life where you've seen success. Can you reflect upon that? Recognize some things you went through, realize that success probably did not come without a little bit of pain or challenge, that you did overcome it, that the past things you've dealt with prepare you for the things you're dealing with today. So from a practical perspective of creating hope, you can embrace the idea of setting goals, that you can foster a positive environment, finding people who want to do good things, who you can engage in inspirational activity, things that uplift people's emotional state, that you can practice mindfulness and gratitude, that you are in an environment that's supporting and encouraging, you giving it and you receiving it, in an environment that is about collaboration and teamwork. And finally, can you reflect on the things that are past that were successful? This is a little less tactical in terms of what we talk about most of the time on this podcast, but I see a lot less hope than we should have. I know things maybe are a little uneven at times. They've been worse. I believe in the future of where we're headed. I believe in the intelligence, the dedication, the positive nature of humanity. Doesn't mean it's utopia, far from it. But there's more hope out there. And what I want you to do is to find ways of recognizing it, embracing it, creating it for you, for the people you work with, for your family, so that you have a sense of the value that you deliver every day in philanthropy, that you have hope that the next day is better than the one that we just are experiencing. Don't forget, check out the blogs at hallettphilanthropy.com. 2-week, 90-second reads. And if you'd like to, please feel free to reach out to me at podcast@hallettphilanthropy.com. This whole episode has been about challenges and finding solutions to create a better environment, hope. And that's the definition of philanthropy. As we mentioned earlier in this podcast, it is not about, never has been, when we look at it in the right way, about money. How do we make the world a better place? Love of mankind, love of humankind. Some people make things happen. Some people watch things happen. Then there are those who wondered what happened. You are someone who's creating hope for someone else if you're in the nonprofit space. You may not see it directly, but you are. We find others who want to do the same, people who want to make things happen. For those in our community, organizations, people, community parts, groups that are wondering what happened. And that is the essence of hope. I'll look forward to seeing you next time, right back here on the next edition of Around with Randall. And don't forget, make it a great day.